So the other day, my buddy Andy called me, and he said, there's this verse, Dave. We were reading it this morning. I have no idea what it means. Can you help me out here? And as a teacher, I'm kind of wired to be excited by those situations. And he is right. It's a weird passage, and I got even more excited because if I can, I'm going to get to the bottom of things. The passage is Luke 14:34-35. It said this: "Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is of no use either for the soil or the manure pile. It is thrown away. He who has ears, let him hear." So, last things first. He who has ears, let him hear. That's something that Jesus said a lot, and he meant this: that God is going to give some people the ability to understand what he is saying, and that those who understand what he is saying should take heed and follow up on it and take action. But this passage about the salt is strange. What is he talking about? Salt losing its taste. It's no good for the soil or the manure pile. Why would you put salt in a manure pile? So I started researching it. I have a book called The Bible Background Commentary that I've used since the 90s. Terrific resource that gives some of the cultural backgrounds. And I looked in there, I looked at a couple other resources, and it said, this could be referring to use of salt in agriculture. And I said, that's an interesting angle. I'm going to follow up on that a little more because that would actually make sense in this passage. And I found a terrific article that I really think unlocks the whole meaning of the passage. I'm going to read a little bit from it right now. It's by Anthony Bradley, who is a professor at King's College in New York City. He says this: "When Jesus spoke about salt in Matthew 5:13, Mark 9:50, and this Luke 14 passage we just read, he was referring to several varieties of salts used in the first century. These salts were unlike modern table salt, sodium chloride, in our kitchens. The salts in Jesus' day were mixtures of chlorides of sodium, magnesium, and potassium with very small amounts of calcium sulfate or gypsum. Some of these would dissolve more quickly than others, while some were better able to withstand the elements. These hardier, saltier salts were generally more valuable in an agricultural context because that meant their benefits would last longer. When Jesus talked about salt losing its saltiness or savor, it refers to a process in which the compounds of salts disintegrate over time. Disintegrated salt loses a small amount of gypsum, which changes its saltiness. This change in saltiness makes it a less effective fertilizing agent. So when Jesus talked to his followers about losing their saltiness, he was talking about losing their fertilizing properties, their ability to bring forth life and growth. If Jesus wasn't talking about table salt but fertilizing salt, it means that his reference to the salt of the earth in Matthew 5:13 can just as easily be translated the salt of the soil. In other words, it's talking about dirt, not our planet. And that makes a lot more sense to me. This makes better sense of Jesus' words in Luke 14:34 and 35. That's the passage we're focused on. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is fit neither for the soil nor the manure pile. It is thrown out. The reference to the manure pile has long been a source of confusion when viewing salt as a seasoning in these passages. Jesus' saying makes more sense when we realize that salt maintains the fertilizing properties of dung. The name of this article is actually "You Are the Manure of the World." No offense. It is common knowledge today that salt can be used to preserve food, but it's been used as an agricultural preservative for fertilizer for centuries as well. A 19th century agricultural reference volume notes that salt is applicable in all cases in which fermented dung cannot be carted at once to land. Covering the heap with salt will be found to be a cheap and effective means of checking or stalling the fermentation. Salt also keeps dung hills from rotting and becoming useless as fertilizer while enhancing the fertilizing properties of dung. This centuries tested agricultural understanding of salt fits these passages in the ancient world much better than interpreting the salt as table salt, even if it makes all this talk of fertilizer and manure makes us a bit squeamish. In further research, I discovered that not only did the ancient Hebrews use salt in this way, but so did the Chinese and the early Romans. Salt was used in arid places to help soil retain moisture, destroy weeds, make stubborn soils easier to till, and make sour grass sweeter and more appealing to the cattle. So, this really makes these passages make sense to me. So, assuming that Jesus is talking about these salts that were used for agricultural purposes, and it was possible for these salts to lose their potency and become useless and worthless, it unlocks the passage. The word translated lost its taste is, that's a little bit of a sketchy translation because it assumes that we're talking about table salt, because if we're talking about agricultural salt, that's not salt you would eat. It wouldn't taste very good. That word for lost its taste is actually used in different ways in the New Testament. When it's speaking of people, it's translated became foolish. A better translation for that word might be lost its effectiveness. So it didn't really lose its taste or its savor. It lost its effectiveness. It lost its ability to do that which it was purposed to do. The thing it was meant for, it was now useless for. It became useless for its intended purpose. And these disciples of Jesus had an intended purpose, and he was telling them not to become useless. Jesus uses the salt metaphor to complete his previous statement on the importance of full commitment to being an effective disciple. He's just finished saying this: any of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. He was saying that half-hearted disciples are useless. Now we know that Jesus was extremely patient with his disciples, with their doubts and their self-centeredness and immaturity, but he never stopped calling them to full commitment. And he said the key to their effectiveness as disciples was that full commitment, as witnessed in this passage, and their ongoing connection to him, as we see in John 15, 1 through 11, the vine and the branches passage, another agricultural passage, by the way. Christians are supposed to be salt. We're supposed to be the light of the world. We're supposed to bring his life and spark to everything we do. We're supposed to be effective salt that makes life spring forth wherever we go. Fertilizer, miracle grow. Christians are the miracle grow of the world. His life force should be infused into our conversations, our work, our art, and even our cooking. It's important to us Italian guys, me and Andy, The world should notice. We should do everything with all of our hearts. There should be soul in what we do, and it should cause good things to grow. Every good and perfect gift is from above, from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. That is what James 1:17 says. Goodness points back to God. When we do things that produce goodness, it points to God and it points people to God. As the world groans and declines, we are supposed to be the bearers of life and goodness, making beautiful things grow where there was only barrenness, whether that is the garden at your house or the inner city or the classroom you work in or your office, wherever God has stationed you in life. The creative spark of joy comes directly to all from God at times. This is what we call common grace. We all get a little taste of God's goodness in creation every day. We're all capable of making things that glorify God in terms of music or art or good food. And it can even come through the godless who do not acknowledge him. But it is supposed to flow through believers in a powerful, unique, effortless, and consistent way. The life of God should flow through us. We should be the fertilizer of the world, and it should produce fruit that will last, as it says in John 15. We are the vessels of God's love, power, creativity, and ultimately the gospel message itself. Titus talks about adorning the gospel, making the message of the gospel attractive. And we do that by the way we live our lives and the way we relate to one another. So go be good manure this week. Okay, love you guys.